I can't see a world in which I would bring my wife and children back to the UK. Those words were not written by a tabloid. They were not guessed by a critic. Harry said them himself. He said them to the BBC on camera in May of last year, and he said them on the day he lost in court. He told the world there was no world he could see where this happened, and this month he is trying to walk straight into the world he couldn't see. His wife, both children, that same country. Nothing about the reason he gave has changed. The court still said no. The protection he asked for still has not come. Only his answer changed. So tonight we are not reading a rumor. We are reading a promise and the date stamped on it. And we are asking one quiet question. What moved when the record shows nothing did? Let's start with why this one matters, because on the surface it looks like every other royal headline. A trip, a rift, a family that cannot sit in one room. But this story is different, and here is why. Most royal drama is about what someone felt. This is about what someone said on the record, with a camera running. Harry gave a reason. He named it clearly. He said his family could not come home because they would not be kept safe. That was not a mood, it was a stated condition. And a stated condition can be checked. So we can do the one thing this channel exists to do. We can hold the promise up against the paperwork. We can line up the day he said it against the day he booked the flight. We can ask, what changed in between? What we know publicly is simple. The court ruling stands. The review he was promised has, by his own team's account, never happened. The refusal came again, days before the trip. By every available signal, the wall he described is still standing. And yet the family is packing. That gap between the reason and the return is the whole story. Tonight we walk through it slowly. Tonight we are going through the full picture. The exact words he used and the day he chose to use them, the court ruling that did not go his way, the review that was promised and never came, the invitation from his father that he finally took after turning it down for years, and underneath all of it, the one question the record keeps raising and no one will answer. What is a promise worth when the thing behind it never moved? Now let's talk about who is speaking, because the weight of a promise depends on the man who makes it. This is Harry, Diana's son. If you watched that funeral in 1997, you remember the boy walking behind the coffin. That boy is the man whose words we are reading tonight. And for 5 years, he has told the world one story. It is not a story about money. It is not a story about comfort. It is a story about safety. In 2020, he stepped back from royal duties. With that step, his automatic police protection was pulled. He took that decision to court. He argued that the change left his family exposed. And last spring, the Court of Appeal dismissed his case. He lost. That is not tabloid speculation. That is a documented ruling. On the very day of that ruling, he sat down with the BBC. He was, by his own word, devastated. And he drew a line in public. He said he could not bring his wife and children back at this point. He framed it as a duty of care thrown out the window. He said something else too, and it matters. He said he could only come back safely if he was invited. Not if he asked, if he was invited. So the gate was set, and the man holding the key by his own telling was his father. What we know publicly is that this framing held for years. Meghan has not set foot in Britain since the late Queen's funeral in 2022. The children have not been back since that same summer. And the fact that this silence lasted 4 full years is what makes the sudden return land with the weight it does. So let's walk the timeline, because the order of events is where this gets interesting. Start with the offer that sat on the table. For years, a place to stay was there for the taking. Palace sources say the family was offered accommodation on the royal estate for any visit. For years, they did not take it. That is the first receipt. The door was open. They chose not to walk through it. Then comes late June of this year. The story breaks. The family is coming, July 7th to July 11th. And this time, something is different. This time, they say yes to the roof. Their own representative confirmed it in a news release. They would stay across a mix of royal residence and private accommodation. The first time they have ever accepted the offer. Read that slowly. The offer did not change. The answer did. Now here's the part the coverage skipped. Why did the answer change? The obvious guess is that the safety problem got solved. It did not. And this is the receipt that matters most tonight. By the Sussex's own account, a formal risk review was promised for this trip. They said it was assured it would be done by March. They gave 6 months of notice. And it never happened. That is not a hostile source saying that. That is their own statement. Sit with the shape of it. They were told a review was coming. They planned around it. And the review never came. The royal commentator, Richard Fitzwilliams, pushed on exactly this point. He called the whole situation chaotic. But even as a critic, he flagged the same strange fact. He noted the assessment was promised last December, after Harry lobbied the Home Secretary. And he said it is very curious indeed that it still has not taken place. If this channel is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, take a second and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people who want the receipts, not the noise. So the review never landed. And then, days before the flight, the answer came in a different form. Protection was refused again. Reports say the request for taxpayer-funded police protection was turned down just before the family was due to travel. And the man who wrote off a whole world last spring reacted exactly as you would expect. Sources say he was distraught. Other sources say devastated, close to tears. On the 2nd of July, his own spokesperson spoke. He said Harry is exploring every available option to enable the visit to proceed safely. Read those words carefully. Not to enjoy the visit, to make it safe. The exact thing he said was missing is the exact thing he is still chasing, days before the plane. He didn't get the safety back. He got on the plane anyway. Now, let's bring this back to the promise, because here is the paradox that will not leave me alone. The reason he gave has not moved 1 inch. The court still said no. The review still never happened. The protection was refused again this week. Every documented fact that stood behind that sentence in May still stands today, and yet the answer flipped. So what actually changed? The record does not confess, but it does offer readings, and I will give you 3. You decide which one fits. Here is the first reading. Maybe the barrier was never only about a number of bodyguards. Remember his own words. He said he could come back safely only if he was invited. This year, the invitation came with a covered roof attached. On this reading, nothing about the danger changed. What changed is that the one door he said existed finally opened. He is not walking past the wall. He is being let through a gate. Here is the second reading. Look at the calendar. This trip marks 1 year until the Invictus Games in Birmingham, the event he founded. That date cannot move. He built it. On this reading, an immovable object met an immovable date, and the date won. The thing he called impossible became possible the moment the alternative was missing his own games. And here is the third reading, the one with a harder edge. Maybe a line drawn in the worst hour of a court defeat was never a policy. Maybe it was a feeling, said out loud, as if it were a rule. In May of last year, he had just lost, and he was devastated, and he spoke in absolutes. Feelings expire, rulings do not. On this reading, the promise was real when he made it, and it simply did not survive the year. I'm not telling you which reading is true. That is not the job. The job is to lay the 3 of them next to the same unmoved wall and let you weigh them. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below. Which reading do you land on? Did the door finally open, or did the promise simply expire? There is a defensible case for each, and I want to hear yours. Because whichever one you choose, the shape underneath is the same. A man stated a hard condition in public, on the record. The condition was never met, and he moved anyway. That is not a scandal. It is something quieter and stranger. It is a promise outliving the reason it was built on. Now let's bring this to the wider frame, because I am not the only one watching the gap between the words and the plane. The people closest to the story are watching it too. The royal commentator Robert Jobson put it bluntly. He said Harry is facing the consequences of his own actions. He argued that Harry believed protection would simply follow him out the door in 2020, and that it did not, and that the obstacles now flow from the deal he chose back then. That is a hard line, but notice what it agrees with. It agrees that the safety problem was never solved. It was baked in 5 years ago. Fitzwilliams lands in a similar place from a different angle. He says the couple are not trusted by the family. But then, to his credit, he does not pretend the risk is imaginary. He notes they are 2 of the most high-profile people in the world. He notes there have been threats. He notes Harry has a stalker. So even the critics split into 2 camps, and both camps point at the same wall. One camp says he brought it on himself. The other says the danger is real and the process failed him. What observers keep noting is that neither camp can explain the timing. Neither can tell you why the answer changed while the facts held. That is the hole in the middle of every take. And it is the hole this whole story lives inside. To be fair, there is a serious counter-argument, and it deserves its full weight. The honest version goes like this. Maybe the promise did not really break at all. The king offered a residence that comes with its own protection. So inside that residence, the family is covered. On this reading, Harry did not abandon his condition. He found a partial bridge over it and took a careful risk for his charities and for his children to see their grandfather. And there is a second, fairer point inside this. The review he was promised genuinely never happened. That is not his failure. That is the state's. So you could argue the process broke faith with him, not the other way around. That reading has real merit, and I want you to sit with it. Here is where it stops holding. The residence covers the residence. It does not cover the school run, the drive, the street, the airport. By multiple accounts, outside that roof, he would rely on a police liaison phone number and private guards who cannot carry firearms. So the gap he described in May is still open. He is not stepping over the wall. He is stepping through a door in it, into the same exposed ground on the other side. The bridge does not close the gap, it just gets him to the edge of it. So let's go back to where we started, back to the sentence, back to the day he lost, and the camera, and the line he drew. He said there was no world he could see where his family came home. He called it, in effect, the world he couldn't see. And this month, he is standing in the doorway of exactly that world, bag in hand, still asking for the one thing he said had to come first. A promise is a document too. His is dated May 2025, and it is the one document on this whole story that no reporter had to leak because he read it out himself. The court ruling still stands. The review still never came. The protection was refused again this week. And the world he couldn't see is the one he is trying right now to walk his children into. What changed when the record changed? Nothing. Nobody in a position to answer that has answered it. Not the palace, not the government, not the man who made the promise. And maybe that silence is the truest receipt of all. Just receipt of... So here is the question for you tonight. And it is a memory question because many of you have lived every chapter of this. Think back over these 5 years, all the interviews, all the courts, all the lines drawn in public. When Harry said he could not bring them home, did you believe it was a permanent truth or a feeling spoken in a hard hour? Do you think the door finally opened for him? Or do you think the promise simply expired? Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what happens when that plane lands. And a like genuinely helps us reach more people who want this kind of analysis. See you in the next one.